Miracle Mommy here, bringing you another video. And this one, I'm going to call Stop Picking on the Pickmishas. Okay, we gotta stop picking on them, ladies. I want to explain their mindset to you and then show you how you can navigate around it. Because, again, I do agree that some of them can be dangerous. Some of them can be not just self-sabotaging, but also sabotage you on your journey and your level up. But I just want to give you a little peek into their mindset and just have you develop a little bit of compassion for where they're coming from, all right? Now, for me, growing up in the 80s and 90s, I have a really different perspective about Gen X and Gen X women and the things that kind of develop their consciousness. And when you guys of millennials and Gen Zs, right, see us as not being very smart, you see us as not being very strategic, and there's a reason for that, okay? A lot of us were raised by people who came of age in the 70s during a very revolutionary, the 60s and 70s. This was a very revolutionary time, and militants was very much a part of what was going on in the 60s and 70s. So militants pretty much raised us, right? Militants in this black revolution, militants in black power, militants in... So there's a lot of militant ideology that we were raised with, that was ingrained in us. A lot of our family members were Black Panthers or were very involved in the church that had a very militant arm. Now, my parents had a little bit of a different perspective, okay? The quote-unquote black boulets, and again, we were not wealthy, but we would kind of consider that, like the black boulet, I guess that's if you want to use YouTube terms. We were very much involved in the church, but here's the problem. They saw the church getting very politically active, but the church really did nothing for the needs of the community. Like the church would support a candidate running for state senator or for federal office, right? But then would close their food bank that fed the community, right? So you would see a lot of people from that generation start to really question things. Another thing, especially if you talk to my dad's in his early 70s now. When people say that welfare kicked black men out of the house, no, my dad says it's something completely different. In 1965, the biggest problem to him was not welfare. The biggest problem to him was heroin. That's what he was losing more friends to. That's what we get, taking more fathers out of the home with substance abuse. So to him, and if you really think about it, the number one reason why black men kill each other, right, is over the drug trade. The number one reason why a lot of black men are incarcerated or have prison records is because of the war on drugs. And even now, a lot of reasons why, even in states where weed is legal, one of the reasons why a lot of black men are not in the workforce is because they can't piss clean. And a lot of them are unskilled labor. And they are requiring a clean urinalysis for hire. So to him, the biggest problem in the black community is not welfare. The biggest problem is drugs. And no one says anything. And you can go to a lot of black churches who will have choir meetings and political action committees, but there'll be no AA and no NA. You can, if you really think about it, in 1995, when Louis Farrakhan got over 100,000 black men on the mall, the National Mall, one of the largest gatherings, the Million Man March, one of the largest gatherings on the Capitol in our modern times, right? He was the only person who ever addressed black male sobriety, and then nobody ever picked it up and took it back to the community. The Million Man March yielded very little to nothing in the black community, right? Galvanizing and organizing all those black men for a 100% peaceful protest, it yielded very little to nothing. So when you see Pickmishas or from that Gen X generation, like, you have to understand where we're coming from. You have to understand where we are coming from. We were raised by militants. Like my mother, one of my favorite movies of all time was Forrest Gump. right? I love that movie. And then there's a scene in Forrest Gump where Forrest is speaking at the Capitol for a huge protest of the Vietnam War. So he's speaking from his soldier experience, and the microphone goes dead, and then Jenny, his childhood sweetheart, sees him, and then they run and embrace each other in the middle of the reflecting pool in front of the Washington Memorial, right? So many people tried to play that scene out when I used to live in D.C. Forrest, Jenny. The next scene, you'll see Jenny is walking into a Black Panther meeting. Now, if you talk to my mom, again in her late 60s, what the Black Panthers were, and she said, this is a Black woman who was raised in the church. Now, to her, civil rights looked like Coretta Scott King. Civil rights looked like Merle Evers. Civil rights looked like Betty Shabazz. So there was always a level of faith and modesty. So when she goes to her first Black Panther meeting, that's the first time she ever saw a woman without a bra in public. That's the first time she ever saw a woman without a bra in public. It was a Black Panther meeting. And she will tell you, when I was watching that scene, that drug-addicted white women had full free access. They were able to walk freely in and out of there. And when you see, I think the director of that movie was Robert Zemeckis. So when you see Robert Zemeckis' perspective of that, they knew that too. They knew that drug-addicted white women had full access to the Black Revolution. And that's why Robert Zemeckis felt so comfortable putting it in one of his most widely watched and best received movies of his career. This movie won how many Oscars? Right? This movie was seen how many times? It's one of the best filmography. It's part of American filmography, right? History. This movie made history. And Robert Zemeckis, a white man, knew that. And I'm hoping I'm correct with the director of that movie, but they knew that drug-addicted white women, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think that the man Jenny was with was supposed to be Black, but they ended up making a casting change at the last minute because they didn't really want that kind of smoke because they knew they were would be potentially up for Oscar contention. So the reality is, people knew this. So when people say that, oh, it's Black women's treachery that took down the Black Revolution, no, it wasn't. Because you know what? Drug-addicted white women are the same people who took down Charles Manson, right? They were the same people who took down the hippie movement. Because they were the ones sleeping in vans and the free love. But when it was time for them to get back into society, they're the reasons why he got arrested. They're the reasons why they ended the hippie movement when they were ready to go back into mainstream society. So for us to say that there's Black women's feminism and Black women's treachery, and I'm going to link in the description box to Samantha Cooker's video about feminism. Her mother was also part of that quote-unquote Black Boule class, right? She was a Howard University alum who was talking about what Black women were thinking and doing at that time. And I really encourage you to talk to your elders. Find out what really happened. Like, do they really see welfare as the reason why the Black family broke up? And what is their idea of Black militancy? Because a lot of the Black Boule class got marginalized after that. Right? Think about how me, in my case, I was extremely marginalized after that. Here I am, in 1990, I was doing my first cotillion. So here I am learning how to walk in heels, learning how to sit, wearing white gloves, with my press and curl hair, right? And then they're talking about the number one song on the radio. I'm in Queens at this time. So the number one song on the radio at that time was LL Cool J, who's also from Queens, Around the Way Girl. Right? I want a girl with extensions in her hair, bamboo earrings, at least 2 pair, a Fendi bag, and a bad attitude. Now these Black men are talking about how materialistic and how much fake hair we have and how bad our attitudes are. The same guys who dictated this culture. So you have to understand, when you see these militant, when you see these ratchet Black women, they were following a script that was given to them when they were coming of age. So way these women were socialized. And so many of us, and as far as black women who are socialized as far as education, so many of us were raised to be Claire Huxtable. How many of us were raised to be Claire Huxtable? Go to an HBCU and then meet your clique, the love of your life, right? And raise 5 children and be a working mother and be graceful and be not argumentative, but yet still affirmative, just be successful career-wise and still have a successful family. So that superwoman, I can do all things, that was very much ingrained in us from the mainstream part of society, right? And not to mention, Different World was also really big at that time. So many black kids wanted to go to colleges, and historically black colleges at that. Out-of-state private institutions were the ones that were touted the highest, right? The Spelmans, the Morehouse, the Howards, the Hamptons. These are private out-of-state schools. So when you talk about this student loan crisis, that was us. Praise God that I didn't really have to deal with that because I was in ROTC, right? So the military paid for my education. My older sister, because my dad sent us to private school, we had a lot of advantages, academic advantages. So because she had such a high GPA, she didn't really have to pay a lot for college out of pocket because she had a high GPA. She was also part of my sister went to Hampton. She's a pirate. I'm a Howard Bison, right? So there was the HU versus HU. Who's the real HU rivalry going on in our house, right? So it was so funny growing up, it was like, I go to the real HU, you go to the other HU. That was kind of our family's rivalry, right? So my older sister at Hampton, she was one of the Ebony Fire dancers. So she was a hot girl on campus. She was one of the hot girls. And the guy she ended up marrying was an engineer from like Columbia, South Carolina, who it literally was the Dwayne Wade type. He was not dripping swag. He was not super thugged out. He was not that way at all. But this is what I will say. A lot of these educated lames, ladies, they got the same fuckboy value system as these hood dudes. Like, if we're keeping it all the way 100, they got the same fuckboy value system. Like, if you're part of the Divine Nine, there's a lot of baby daddies that are wearing that purple and gold in their Q dolls. There's a lot of baby daddies who are A5As. There's a lot of IOTAs who are baby daddies, right? Because they go to these campuses where the women outnumber the men, something like 9-1, and they think they can live out their fuckboy high school fantasies on these college campuses. So that whole scarcity mindset that you see these quote-unquote Pickmishas have, right? That's where that comes from. Because it literally was a scarce mindset. Like, we knew we couldn't go back to our homes in the hood, especially those of us who were raised. I was not raised hood, right? I was not raised in the hood, but a lot of my friends are sorority. I have a line sister who's from Watts. So sure, she had a scarcity mindset because it was either these dudes here or the dudes back home who were gangbanging. So she had no frame of reference. I mean, the only reason why, honestly, it is the grace of God that I did not grow up with that scarcity mindset. I came of age. And my dad had sent me to Catholic school. A good portion of my high school career and a good portion of my middle school, right, was spent in Catholic school. And I wanted to be Catholic, right? My dad was like, no, your mom is like black church royalty, and she would never allow that, and I'm not going to have that in my house. That's something you got to do as an adult. And it is something I did as an adult. I was baptized and confirmed at age 19. And as a result, I was at the Archdiocese, taking part in their singles ministries, taking part in their community service. And that's the thing that really got to me with that church, is because they had such an extensive community service outreach, right? A really big community service outreach. They were very much about, they had homeless shelters and food banks. And I really felt, and it's also too, being a nursing major, I had it, I thought that's what I'm going to do. I want to do mission work and help people. And believe it or not, that's how I even ended up in that's how I ended up in the military, because there was a lot of military hospitals that were set up in third world countries that was doing like outreach medicine, but really it was kind of like propaganda. I didn't realize that at the time. Again, I was a teenager, so I didn't realize that at the time. In fact, that's how they found Bin Laden, through like a military outreach operation. That's in fact how they tracked down Bin Laden, right? Doing immunizations in these third world countries. Of course, I didn't know that at 18, 19 years old. So that's really what opened my eyes, that race was not the thing that they were looking for. They were looking for women who had the right faith. And so my first courtship was with a Mediterranean guy. And that's kind of when I realized, swirling was not really a thing. It was like, can you find a person who has your right faith background? Now, when I met this Mediterranean guy's parents, he was actually from Italy. His family was actually from Italy, right? And his mother always knew that he was going to get a black woman. Like, she says that he was watching TV at like 6 years old and he saw Tina Turner on television. It was like, oh, that's my wife. And he always, so his parents always knew. So they were not surprised at all by me being black. Now, clearly it didn't work out. He was a 24-year-old grad student. I was like a 19-year-old who had just declared a major, right? So we're just on two different paths in life. And of course, he was abstinent, waiting for marriage. And I'm like, I haven't even decided what I want to do in my life. So clearly, it didn't work out for obvious reasons. Because I get his position, right? You're abstinent and you're waiting to get married, and you have a graduate degree and a job lined up. So you're at a different phase in your life than I am. But I'm the black woman who gave you the green light, because it was such a stigma in the 90s for a black woman to have a non-black spouse. So I was the first black woman to really give him the green light. So really, that's what it was. You know what I mean? So anyway, he ended up marrying a beautiful Cape Verdean girl. They have like 7 kids. They still send me a Christmas card every year. They're a really nice family, so he did get what he wanted. And in fact, I ended up going to his wedding. And people were like, how'd you go to your ex-boyfriend's wedding? I'm like, we didn't break up because he was a bad person. We broke up because he was not the right person. So it wasn't like there was any bitter feelings. You know what I mean? It wasn't like there was, and we stayed friends. Like, it was like we broke up on a Monday, and then by Friday we were all like at the skating rink with the rest of the people in the campus ministry. It was not bitter at all. So in fact, like I said, I still send his family Christmas cards. He's like a criminology professor at a university, and his wife stays home with their tons of kids. I think some of them are their kids biologically, and some of them are adopted. Just typical like Catholic family. So they're doing well. They're great, but you just have to understand the scarcity mindset at that time. Then let's talk about the Hoteps. The Hoteps, okay. Now the Hoteps was a whole nother thing, right? The black church really had become more and more political, and people saw a lot of hypocrisy. So in comes the Hoteps, right, in the 90s. This resurgence of black consciousness, and people are watching Amistad and like give us free, you know what I mean? And a lot of times religion had a lot to do with that oppression. Sankofa, that was out at the time. That was another movie about like black tribal religions and black, so these were some of like the big things that were going on when in the 90s. So the Hoteps got their foothold, right? But the problem with the Hoteps was they would like take little pieces of Bible verses and then use it to manipulate women, right? Especially in the black church, who I grew up in the black church. But because I grew up Catholic, where Bible study was built into the curriculum, I could be like, no, hold on, wait a minute. The Bible doesn't say that, because I was very well versed, right? I was well versed in the Bible. So having like self-esteem and good reading comprehension skills didn't mix well with Hoteps. So I kind of called that out early. And again, that was the grace of God. And that's why a lot of black women fell into that. They fell into believing the Hoteps. And not to mention, the conscious brother was the guy being promoted. You had the Roots. You had Common. You had had Mos Def, you had Talib Kweli, you had Pharaoh Monch, you had Jurassic 9, you had Dead Prez, these conscious brothers, right? That were constantly being promoted to us. Even Kanye West in his earlier years, right? So that was being promoted to us. This is how we were conditioned, guys. And you guys are being real upset, but we believe that these conscious brothers was going to be the ones who would save us. But if you look at those men now, none of these guys got black wives. Kanye, Common, I think Talib maybe, but Mos Def is not married. Like, none of these guys have black wives. Again, they still have the same, like, fuckboy mentality. That, you know, Common is another one, right? In his 50s, still no wife. So they still have the same fuckboy mentality that these hood dudes do. So, again, this is just me telling you how we were conditioned in that time. And, well, you know, what can I say? Like, you guys just got to understand what was happening then. You have to understand the time. And then you have these women now raising children. So a lot of us who were children of the 90s now have teenagers and young adults. So that's how we were conditioned. So from the women who were raised in the 60s and 70s who were raised in the militants, from those of us who were raised in the 90s who are now raising a group of kids who were raised under the conscious brother, right? It's just a cycle that keeps repeating itself. So you can't be upset about how these quote-unquote pick-me's act. Because this is how they were conditioned. This is how they were raised for like 2-3 generations. And this is why you see the black boule kind of disappear, right? They either blend into the mainstream because the reality was these conscious people kind of marginalized us because we were too close to, you know, being military. You know, me. Can you imagine walking around Howard in the 90s when Love Jones and people walking around with locks and people throwing their fists up in the air and the Million Man March, me walking around Howard in a military uniform? Like, can you imagine what that must... It probably was like the 1960s, like when my uncles were in the Vietnam War and the whole world is going crazy. It was probably that same feeling. You know? The black middle-class boule. And then you guys wonder, none of you guys like the good brother. None of you guys... Of course nobody liked it. They didn't like the good brother back in the 60s and 70s either, who actually responded to the draft and didn't duck the draft, who actually had to stay sober to protect his military career. So y'all didn't like that dude neither. So how were you expecting black women to like that dude? Okay, that dude was marginalized. I remember being told by one of my ROTC cadre, right? These are the people who like the instructors for the ROTC, right? That back in the 60s, a lot of the black men, what they would do was put like stocking caps and do-rags on their head to pack their hair down to meet the military regulations. And then when they got offshore, when they got a chance to go like back to the States, they could just pick their afros out. So they didn't look like they were part of the military because it was a huge anti-military sentiment then. And that sentiment you saw also in the 90s, especially during the first Gulf War. Colin Powell was a sellout. But to me, he was a mentor. So late 90s, early 2000s, he had a really hands-on role with a lot of the ROTCs, the black HBCU ROTCs. So Howard, Grambling, FAMU, I mean, he was giving us the game. He gave us retired General Colin Powell gave us the game, right? But then again, he's a sellout. So this is what I'm trying to say. You gotta understand the mentality. Another thing I can say, honestly, with ROTC that really helped me with the scarcity mindset was that ROTC is mostly male. So even though I was on a campus that was predominantly female, 9 women to every 1 man, ROTC still was, for the most part, mostly male. And I was on the color guard. So the color guard, you know, that's like the people who you see go onto the football field with the flags. That's the color guard. So our color guard was very good. And we got a chance to compete with other color guards and drill teams and things like that. So there was one competition at VMI, Virginia Military Institute. that they would do drill teams, color guards, rifle teams, marksmanship. So it was like a kind of a competition for military skills. Now, you go from being on a campus, right, where it's 9 females to every 1 male, to a campus that's got the opposite demographics. It's 9 men for every 1 woman. So you go from this scarcity mindset to all of these dudes trying to get at you just because you have something different in your and especially too because I did like to wear my class A's with a skirt, or my class B's with a skirt, right? Dudes, you didn't even have to be that pretty. Like, let's be real. If you're in that type of environment, you don't have to be that pretty for dudes to be all up on you. Wondering, can they carry your stuff? And do you need this? And do you need that? Because they would go sometimes weeks at a time without seeing or talking to another female. So you have a huge advantage being in ROTC. Again, that's one of the things that got me out of that scarcity mindset. Another thing, too, was when I finally did graduate and get out, my first duty station was Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. And my reserve unit is still in San Antonio, Texas. I'll be retiring soon. In fact, I'll be retiring soon. So, you go from a campus. First of all, Washington, D.C., it's 12 black women for every 1 black man. 9 black women for every 1 black man on Howard's campus. So your odds are better there. And then ROTC, where I have a slight advantage. But again, still very, very, very much lopsided. So I go to Fort Sam Houston. All right. Fort Sam Houston is 70% male, 30% female at that time. Not to mention the fact that there are 2 other military bases. There's Lackland Air Force Base, and then there's Randolph Air Force Base that have the exact same ratio. Then you got a very, very large Catholic population in a city that's predominantly male. Okay, so a lot of those males were Hispanic, but predominantly male nonetheless. So again, I go from the desert to a place of abundance. Even still, San Antonio has a pretty large male demographic. It's mostly male. There's a lot of cities in Texas that are mostly male because Hispanic men come here to work. And I'm not just talking about these illegal immigrants who jump the border, right? I'm talking about legal immigrants with work visas and student visas. I've said that before. In fact, I think one of the ex-Mexican presidents, Vicente Fox, I think one of his nephews or distant cousins ended up going to University of the Incarnate Word in San Antonio. So that's what you got coming into San Antonio, okay? It's not just these migrant farm workers. And then the ratio for men doesn't favor them. So it's not uncommon to see black women with Latino men in San Antonio. Because guess what? You got a lot of leverage. You got a lot of leverage, number one, because it's a mostly male city, especially among the 2nd and 3rd generation Hispanics. Number 2, a lot of these guys are Catholic. So very much there's a failure to launch type of thing. If a guy is Catholic and not married by 30, their culture kind of looks at them a little bit like failures, you know. I got a funny story about that, in fact. I'll take a little detour. There's a funny story I have. So I have a girlfriend, Vanessa, who's very pretty, gorgeous girl. She's in her late 20s, and she is the black Southern Baptist, you know. So I invite her to a church event because we're trying to get a school supply drive going. And I was like, well, you want to come to my church? And she's like, well, yeah. I was like, listen, in as much you do unto the least of these, so you do unto me also. We're people who love Jesus, and we're people who need to serve our community. So let's put this stuff aside, and you can come to church with me, and then we'll work on this school supply drive because kids are in need. And that's really the bottom line, right? How you feel about my religion is whatever. So she comes to my church. And of course, being a black Southern Baptist woman, what does she bring to church? She brings a sakatumi cake, right? Because that's what black Southern women do. And of course, in a mostly male Hispanic environment, a single woman who can cook Child, you would have thought that you would have put some bloody meat in a tank of piranhas. Man, they came all around. You see? Okay, well, hold up. Ignacio, slow your roll. Ignacio, slow your roll, okay? Ignacio, Vanessa, Ignacio. Okay, before you get all up in this woman's business, how about introduce yourself? And while you eating this woman's cake, please get a fork. And I get it. I know Ignacio. Ignacio is 30, and he is single. And I know how his mother is, okay? I know how his mother is. Like during the power outages and all this stuff in Texas. Ignacio's mother, she very passive aggressive, okay? Let's say that. That's the word I'll give her. If you want to know nice nasty, talk to some of these Hispanic abuelitas. Man, they can do nice nasty. They can give you nice nasty lessons. So he's like, Mom, I'm just checking on you, because I know that you have no lights. Well, I also have no grandchildren. And if I had grandchildren, they would be the light of my life. She say stuff like that. She'd be like, there's no heat in your house. Are you doing okay? Well, if I had me some grandchildren, maybe they could warm my heart. It's stuff like that. This is how she talks to her son. This is stuff she says. So, of course, if he meets a single, available, attractive woman who can cook, of course he's going to jump on that opportunity. So, I mean, again, black women, you can leverage your love of Jesus. You can leverage your love of Jesus. Because there's a lot of men who love Jesus. Okay? You can leverage that. It might not be very, very valuable in Blackistan, but other people value that. So leverage that. Get out there. I know my older sister, she was kind of talking about when she went through her divorce. She was talking about that, like, oh, that reminds me. My older sister did get divorced because he ended up being a fuckboy, same kind of fuckboy. This guy's been married twice and has 3 children. None of the children are with his wives. The first baby he had was when he was married to my sister with some other like hood chick, some other ratchet ass chick, right? And then with his second wife, he did the same thing. Some old ratchet female. You marry Claire Huxtable, but then you run around with Little Kim. So that's how they do. That's how these quote unquote educated lames do. They got a Whitley Gilbert and they got a Megan Thee Stallion. You know what I mean? That's how they do. And then they talk and complain about ratchet women and taking their checks and ruining their lives. Like, well, if you would have honored your marriage vows, you wouldn't have these problems. And when he went through his second divorce, it was so funny because on his social media, I heard from a friend because I don't follow him. And I don't really do Facebook and stuff like that. He was talking about what an institution of marriage set up against black men. I'm like, dude, institution of marriage ain't got nothing to do with the fact that you could not keep your pants on. I mean, I got another girlfriend too, married to a guy, HBCU graduate, ideal black man, IBM, educated. Now she out-earns him, but he still makes good money. But he always running around with some non-black, super conscious, got a whole podcast talking about the most revolutionary act is having a black family. You got a black family, but none of your side chicks is black. None of your side chicks black. He will run up in a dirty white Latina any minute you give him an opportunity. The only thing that's been keeping him faithful right now is the quarantine. Real talk. And she met this dude at church. She met this dude at church. So I'm just going to try to say like that whole fuckboy thing. It's cultural. It's cultural. That's not economic. They always blame it on the Pookies and the Ray Grays. No, these middle class dudes is just as dirty. Make no mistake. So what I'm trying to say is, when it comes to these pick-me's, take it kind of easy on them. Understand their mindset, understand how they were raised, understand that this is not stupidity. This is conditioning. And it's going to take a while. Oh, another thing I'm going to talk about. Skilled trades. My dad was an electrician for 34 years. Now they try to tell you that y'all professional black women, y'all not giving these brothers in the skilled trades a chance, and some of them be earning six figures. And you know that is true. There are some black men who are in the skilled trades that earn six figures. But as someone who has taught on community college and trade school campuses, let me tell you the reality of that. Only 6% of black men will ever do that. There are actually more black men in college than there are in trade school. That's fact. I will put the stats in the description box, because you guys know I prove receipts, right? There are way more black men who go to college than that go to skilled trade school. And when you go to skilled trade school, like my dad, your biggest problem is not black women giving you a chance. You have plenty of opportunity to meet black women. Black women know a good electrician. They know a good man when they see one. A good black woman knows a good black man when she sees one. Now, my mom didn't go to college. My mom chose to go to trade school because she wanted to deal with science, and science was not treating black women right at that time. Science fields were not treating, but on the technical school level. So my mom was a chemical technician, right? That was her line of work. And my dad was an electrician. So they were both in the skilled trades. My parents, they were not like the rest of my aunts on my mom's side. And his dad was in the skilled trades. And then his mom was in the skilled trade. She was a telephone operator. And my grandfather, on my dad's side, was with a printing press. But you would see a lot of police officers marry very educated black women who had sorority and church affiliations, because when they wanted to move on and have more of a political role, like my aunt and uncle, my Aunt Jane and Uncle Charlie, that's a primary example. Military guy, then ended up in the police force, and he married my Aunt Jane, church royalty, HBCU affiliated, sorority affiliated. Why? Because she has connections when he went to go to run for his political career, right? She had a lot of connections. So you would see guys in the skilled trades easily be able to get with educated black women back then. But now, those guys are very few and far between. My dad would say that. He would say, like, the biggest problem that a lot of them had was that they weren't their brother's keeper. Now, this is when black men, it was socially acceptable for them to be in skilled trades. But it was socially acceptable for them to work two jobs. Now that's not very socially acceptable for men to work and support a family. Nowadays, you a simp. So my dad would always say that. He would constantly talking about one of the reasons why it was hard to start a business is because you didn't know anybody in distribution. Right? You didn't know anybody in supply and material. You didn't know anybody in the city hall who could get you contracts. You didn't know anybody in the commercial world that can help you grow your business from that sense. Because black men, they were so far and few between, and then when they didn't stick together. They were always in competition with one another, and they were not really collaborating with one another. So, but then you try to bring the young boys up, and this was the time when Dr. Dre's The Chronic album hit. Try to find one that didn't piss hot. And I remember that was like 1992, and my dad was like, this reefer gonna take these boys out the job market. And my dad was 100% right. They would take on these apprenticeships and go all the way through, but then couldn't piss clean. You would try to go and all right, I'll give you a ride to work, and then they wouldn't be ready, and now they're risking your job. So when black men did try to reach back, that whole hip-hop hood culture really did stop the quote-unquote black boule, again, from mentoring, because nobody was respecting them. Nobody respected them. So you guys got to understand that these problems go back way before you were born. These problems are something that are about conditioning and not about stupidity. So really, really kind of take it easy on Pickmishas. Take it easy on these women, okay? Don't judge them so harshly, so quickly. Give them a break and understand their conditioning, okay? So this is Mocha Mommy, and I'll see you in the next one.